This is your spiritual game plan, and I am your host, Sherry Fletcher. Change, it happens to all of us. You've invested your time and energy into an important role, sometimes for years, and then suddenly it's time for you to move on. Maybe you've worked hard on a dream, and now your path is taking a new turn, but the dream isn't going with you. Perhaps you've raised your kids, and they've moved on, but now your empty nest is filled with parent care. Or maybe you're in the middle of diaper changes and laundry piles. If you find yourself asking questions like, where do I fit in anymore? Am I even relevant? How do I find my purpose now? You are in the right place. This is a show for women in a season of transition. I believe that while your roles in life will change, your purpose is eternal. I'm here to help you understand just how intentionally you were made by a creator with a game plan. Through interviews and inspirational guests, we'll discover ways to help you unlock the purpose God placed in you, develop a game plan for your life calling, and embrace the intentional masterpiece you were created to be. Today, I'm speaking with Niki Hardy, an author, speaker, church planter, and Brit living in the USA. She is all about meeting you when life's not fair and helping you thrive, not just survive, no matter what. After losing both her mother and sister to cancer, she too was diagnosed. Eventually, Niki discovered that it was possible to find hope, peace, trust, joy, and even laughter in the midst of it all. She's going to share with us today that life does not have to be pain-free to be full. Niki, I'm so glad you are here joining me today. Thank you for taking the time to talk with me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's great to be here.
I'm excited to have you on my podcast because you and I have both been a part of Hope Writers. And so that's when I first got introduced to your message. And I had fun watching you poll us about some of your photo shoots and topics and covers of the book. So being able to watch that process and now have you on the podcast to share this book is so exciting. So thank you so much for that.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah, it was great. I would love it if you would share a little bit about yourself, your family, and then we're recording this still in 2020, but this is going to air in 2021. So I would love for you to give a little bit of an overview of how God used your message in 2020.
So a little bit about me. All I have to do is open my mouth and you know that I'm from the deep south of England. And but we live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and we moved over here nearly 15 years ago to plant City Church. So City Church is a church here in Charlotte, and we came over here to start it and to plant it. My husband's the pastor, or he is at the moment. He has just said that he will be stepping down next year, which is a big shift, big change, talking about purpose, but that's a whole nother conversation. Wow. And so, yes, I write and I speak and I podcast, and really I'm all about encouraging people when life's fallen apart. And that wasn't my original purpose. I didn't even know what that was, but I know we're going to get onto that. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you. It's true. Well, I like to ask a couple fun facts before we dig in, just to keep it light. And so you mentioned your husband is a pastor. And I'm curious because I heard you mention something that I would not expect from a pastor's wife. You said that you've stolen something before.
I have, Sherry, and this wasn't when I was little. This wasn't when, I tried stealing, a candy bar in the checkout line when I was younger. No, this was relatively recently. It was actually when I was mid-cancer treatment, and a girlfriend took me out to lunch, and we had a lovely time, and we were browsing the little boutiques near the restaurant, and we went into one where, let's just say, it was champagne taste and I had beer money. And but we pretended to look, and I actually found a little bra, like a a bra top thing that I was sure that my daughter would want. And so I put the hanger over my arm and continued to browse. And then, a little while later, my friend was like, all right, well, let's move on. And I was like, okay. And I had no idea that I still had this bra slung over my arm. And I walked out of the shop. And the sweet store owner was like, excuse me, ma'am. And I was like, oh, I stole a bra. And thankfully, she was very sweet and gracious and could tell that I hadn't tried to like slip it in my handbag or anything. But yes, Sherry, I stole a bra. And it wasn't even like a terribly sexy one. It was quite functional, which is really rather sad.
That's awesome. Well, I have a question that I ask every single guest, and that is, looking back in your life, how far back can you see the very purpose that you are living out today in who you've always been?
That is such a great question. And when I was thinking about it, it got me thinking about the journey to what I'm doing now. And I always said, I don't have a thing. I always wanted like a thing, like a purpose or a gifting or something that was tangible that I could say, I am a musician. I am something. And, when we came over here 15 years ago, I had started life out of college in business, in marketing. In fact, believe it or not, Sherry, I was a zoology major. I wanted to be the latest David Attenborough, if people are familiar with BBC
Yes.
Wildlife, that's what I wanted to do. And then kind of wasn't sure, ended up in marketing, met my husband, and then we came to faith in the first year of marriage. So we weren't Christians when we got married. And it was then we felt called to go into ministry. But even then I was like, I don't have a thing. And yes, I was a mom and I loved that, but I wasn't a youth worker. I wasn't a worship leader. I felt like I never fit anywhere. And I kept saying, I don't have a thing. And now having my story is one, for those that don't know me, where I lost my mom and my sister to cancer, and then I was diagnosed. And out of that came this writing, speaking, and now podcasting. And I see now that everything that I did in the past, all the things I just turned my hand to, kind of slightly resentfully that it wasn't my thing, whether it was leading the women's ministry, leading the kids' church, raising my children, training to be a teacher, and then never quite going into teaching, all these things, business, zoology, all have shaped and formed me along with the character that God has given me to do what I'm doing now. But it also didn't negate what I was doing, the purpose at each of those times. So I know we often think about purpose as something that will happen to us in the future, that we will find in the future. Mm-hmm. And I know we were talking about this before we started recording about, we have purpose in the here and now. And if that is, washing up our kids' dinner and loving them well and putting them to bed, that is a good purpose. But what I'm doing now with writing and speaking, definitely I can see the hand of God in that, which is exciting to know that I'm on the right path.
I love that. Yeah. And I think reflecting back on that question is what confirms that we're on the right path. Yeah. Because like you said, we, and you mentioned this in the book, we order a happily ever after. We think we can't be thankful or that we haven't found our purpose until it looks like what we think it's supposed to look like. And, that's a whole nother podcast we need to have, but that is so profound. So being able to look back and see God's hand in this whole thing is such a blessing. Thank you. So I have been reading your book to prepare for our time, Breathe Again, How to Live Well When Life Falls Apart. And I have to say, it was so hard to kind of narrow down what I wanted to talk to you about because there was so many little things. And so the listeners are going to have to get the book. That's all I can say is get the book because it's so good. And like you've mentioned, this is a book about your journey with cancer. But what is wonderful about this is even though you do talk about your cancer, it's not the focus of what God has done through you. And there's more than dealing with just the physical cancer in this book. And it's like you call it the soul destroying myth that the enemy wants us to believe about suffering. So I'd love it if you'd share a little bit about your story, the concept of the book, and thriving, how it was thriving was placed into your heart.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I lost my mom and my sister to cancer. And my sister Jo was just 43 when she was diagnosed and 44 when she died. And they both had aggressive lung cancer. And then we say goodbye to Jo New Year's Eve 2011 to 12. And then just 6 weeks later, I was diagnosed. And mine wasn't lung cancer, Sherry. Mine was, as you'll know from reading the book, mine was rectal cancer. And, you know, that one doesn't come with a pretty pink bow and a teddy bear. Not that any cancer is fun or sexy, but, you know, I kind of went into it thinking, I am going to survive. My faith, my stiff upper lip, and my God, you know, we're going to get through this. And ultimately, I found myself just surviving. I mean, I wanted to survive, but all I was doing was barely surviving, you know, after chemo and radiation and surgery and more chemo. And I had an ostomy bag where I could walk, talk, and poop in church. I mean, everything. And so, but I got to this point where, like you say, I was living a life that I hadn't signed up for, that I hadn't ordered, and didn't look like the abundant life I thought God had said that He came to give me. And so, what happened was I then met cancer survivors who didn't call themselves cancer survivors, but called themselves cancer thrivers. And there was something in that that was so inviting. And I was like, oh, I want what you've got. There was something hope filled and alive. But equally, there was something that was so authentic. It was as if they were saying, I know life stinks right now. And I don't know whether it will ever get better, but I'm jolly well going to grab the most out of it and live it to the full right where I am. And it made me think, Sherry, that, you know, so often we think, well, Jesus came to give us abundant life and to life in all its fullness, you know, and that means to overflowing, to in excess. And not only do we think that's off in the future somewhere, but we equate that with the happy, skippy, healthy, wealthy Instagram, Pinterest life. And so we always think, oh, well, I'll get that at some point when I'm over this hard time, these storms that I'm currently in. Because He also said we'd have storms. And so we end up living in this world, longing for this world. And I realized what these thrivers helped me see was that Jesus never said that an abundant life was perfect. He said there would be storms and He was there in it, and we could thrive, not just survive, no matter what. And so it really helped me decide, okay, well, I'm going to figure out how to do this, even in the midst of everything. And I spoke to lots of people who I talk about in the book and share their stories, people who've had brain tumors, got chronic pain, amputees, a young mom who lost her husband when she was 8 months pregnant with her second, all these different people. And I realized that there are things we can do to help us thrive, not just survive. And so really, Breathe Again isn't a memoir of cancer. Yes, I share my bits of my story, but I share these other thrivers' stories, and I share stories of often forgotten women of the Bible, and I'm super practical. So it's really a kind of part BFF, part, you know, spiritual cheerleader and roadmap for discovering that life doesn't have to be pain-free to be full, as I like to say, and then going and living it. So that's how we got to, where the book is.
Yeah, that's a mic drop. Life doesn't have to be pain-free. Well, I know for me personally, the book was published at the right time for so many of us as we were going through 2020. I'm not alone in saying that 2020 is probably the hardest year I've lived in a long time, if ever, I might be able to say. And I think the hardest part of it was in the middle of everything that had happened in our family, we had to move and leave our community of 28 years and our entire family and move from Washington to Tennessee due to COVID, my position in my husband's job. And, what I have found with your book and with podcasting is that you've been so honest about the struggles and the hard stuff. And that's been so comforting to me. When you're going through stuff, someone else that's going through it too, and can even make a little joke about it, is very helpful. And what I like about how you joke and how you talk is you said your bum got cancer, but your life did not. I think that's how you said it. But when you said that, I just started laughing, and I was like, Satan's working so hard right now to make me think that I'm destined to live miserably. And instead of stopping and looking at where he's at. And so, like you mentioned, there's some practices in your book, and we're going to talk about the one that meant the most to me and give a little bit of the others. But before we get to those practices, there's one foundational truth. In fact, you said it's your mantra that you had to realize, and you shared a little bit about it just a minute ago, that a truth that we need when our world is rocked.
And that's that life doesn't have to be pain-free to be full. And it sounds so glib and so obvious, but when we really think about how we view our lives, especially when we're in the midst of a year like this, I think we can see that we do expect life to be pain-free if it's going to be full and abundant, and if we're going to feel alive. And what I discovered was that it doesn't. Somehow we can find pain and peace in the same hand. We can, find strength in our weakness. We can laugh when all we want to do is cry. And somehow all these emotions that for someone who's not very emotionally in tune, I often joke I wouldn't know an emotion if it came up and introduced itself. But I always thought, well, no, that's a good one and that's a bad one, and they don't like each other and talk, hang out together. But what I learned was actually they do somehow. I don't know how it works, but life really doesn't have to be pain-free to be full. And when we accept that, we actually start to discover it and live it.
Oh, I love that. While you were saying pain and peace in the same hand, when I was teaching a youth class one time, and I was trying to describe the peace that has no, is beyond understanding. I told them to envision, a huge party, loud noises and dishes and people laughing and everything. And if you see a little baby or a toddler, a lot of times they're clinging to their parents' legs, because this room, they're down at the knee level and everything's going on and they're terrified. And all these strangers are coming up and wanted to. And I remember my kids used to say, Mama, hold you, Mama, hold you. And they, put their hands up, and I'd pick them up and hold them. And then they were fine. And the environment had not changed at all. Nothing in the environment had changed. Same people coming up to them, same noises, but I was holding them. And they felt peace. And so true. That's what the Lord is doing, is we've got this going on, but you just have to say, Father, hold you, and he'll pick you up and he'll hold you, and life might still suck. So kind of went off course there, but that's kind of what I was thinking of as you were sharing that. And, speaking of that, I've heard you say that God, we need to look at God's credentials in times like this. He wants us to check out his credentials, because that's, we can understand that, he's got us. And after this year, God's credentials are so evident. And even with everything he's done in our family this year and has been with us through it, I still fall into this mind trap that keeps me in this constant state of overwhelmed. It's kind of like I'm on a merry-go-round and I'm complaining that I'm dizzy, but I'm not getting off. why is it that we hold on to suffering? Like we hold on to it, even though it's destroying our souls.
It's so hard, isn't it, Sherry? I mean, I think there's so many levels to this. And, I speak as one who has been through a lot as opposed to a therapist. But I think there's an element, I know for me, that we hold on to suffering because it becomes part of our identity. And it's easier to, I don't necessarily want to say be a victim, because that's quite an extreme. But there is a part of us that it's it's better the pain we know than the freedom that we don't. I
Ooh,
remember somebody praying for me once, and they had a picture that they felt the Lord give them of, how if you cut your hand as as a glass breaks, and you have a shard of glass in your hand, and you're going, ow, 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 there's glass in there, and it's dripping with blood, and somebody says, open up your hand and I'll take it out, and you're like, no, 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 I can't. But it's as if God is saying, let me unfold your hand and take out the glass. And yes, it'll might be painful, and yes, the healing process is difficult, but it will be so much better. And I think we hold on to it because it becomes more familiar than the freedom, which is actually quite scary. I remember
yeah.
when I was finishing my oncology treatment, and I had all these follow-ups, and eventually my oncologist said, okay, well, this is our last appointment, you don't need to see me anymore. And that was terrifying. I said, what, you're breaking up with me? She was,
Oh, no.
and I felt very untethered. When I was in the trenches with cancer, I was fighting, it felt proactive. I had an enemy to focus on. And then suddenly I'm like, what do I do now? And of course the answer is carry on living, but it's like, okay, this is scary. And so I think there's an element of that in it. And you mentioned checking out God's credentials. One of the practices in the book is trusting God. And I talk about this 5-step process that I needed to create for myself, because I kind of want to trust. I know I should trust, and then I'm like, I trust you, but I'm going to do it my way, or but not with this. And checking out his credentials is the first step. I bet you wouldn't hire a plumber without checking out the credentials. So the same with God. And I think when we check out his credentials, we are more able to say, okay, I can let go of the suffering. Even when we're in the midst of it, we don't have to hold on to it, if that makes sense.
No, it's really powerful and so true. Thank you for that. So, like we've talked about the 7 practices. What I like about the 7 practices is that you share other stories, like you mentioned, other people's stories in these 7 practices. And the practice and the story that has really resonated with me, and actually clarified picking the word gratitude for my year of 2021, is the practicing of being grateful. And last week, while I was, reading through your book again and just kind of highlighting what I wanted to talk about, I got a letter from a really good friend back in Washington. And she wrote a little card that says, gratitude enables our hearts to tell a better story. And I thought, when I share my story of 2020, and when you share your story of what you've gone through, we actually are sharing encouragement and hope. Even though it's a hard story and it's got, areas that aren't pretty and areas that are sad, we're actually giving other people, when we share it from a heart of gratitude, we're giving them hope and encouragement. And I love how, like we talked about earlier, we think we are waiting for this happily ever after that we ordered, or that we heard we would get as if we followed the Lord, we, give this life in abundance. But this chapter was just so powerful on that. And you share a story about Kristin, and it was such a great example of a mind shift. And I would love if you Share that story about her, the mind shift, and then give us a small glimpse of the other practices in the book.
Sure. And I love that note. Gratitude makes us able to tell a better story, because one of the things I discovered, and I talk about in this chapter, is that we don't need to see things differently in order to be grateful. Rather, we're grateful and then we see things differently. And so it's the pure act of gratitude that enables us to see our life differently. It enables us to tell a different story, both to ourselves and to others. And so that's a good friend you've got there. But my friend Kristin, I share the story of my friend Kristin, who it was a young mom, probably 8 or so years ago. And she had 5 children. And she was a make it happen captain, and well, she still is, but she was raising her 5 kids. She was a therapist. She was teaching at the Y. And one Sunday morning, when they were all getting ready and going to church, she was just like, I'm not feeling great, I'm going to go to bed, which was so unlike her. But by the time her family got back from church, she was on the floor, almost unconscious. And what had happened was that she had got strep throat and pneumonia. And what happened was that she then became septic in hospital. And when you go into septic shock, your body is shutting down. And the drugs that she was given to save her life came at the cost of her hands and her feet. So she's a triple amputee, or she will say a 3.5 amputee, because she's only got half of her remaining foot. And so Kristin is raising 5 children with no hands and only half a foot. And she has the most phenomenal outlook on life, Sherry. And I just had to tell her story because, as you say, she shifts her mind talk, if you like, with this one phrase. She says, flip the script. So she says things like, not I've got to do the laundry, but I get to do the laundry. I have 5 beautiful, healthy children. I have a washing machine that will do the wash for me. We have fresh water, and we have enough clothes that need washing on a regular basis. And she shifts her thinking from I have to I get to. She told me the story of when she first was able to get behind the wheel again. And, she was adamant that she didn't want a push button ignition. She wanted an old fashioned turn the key, even though it would take her 15 minutes sometimes to just get it to catch. But it's this mindset of no, I get to drive, and I get to learn how to get this to work and to drive my kids around and hear their chatter in the back on the way to, soccer carpool or whatever it is. And she just has this phenomenal outlook, and she is giving thanks as she does that for anything and everything that she does. And she says that it saved her.
Wow. That story was so good. And just, mind shift. The mind shift is so powerful. It sounds easy, but it's hard, but it's powerful. When we talk about these things, you and I, it's comforting. And it's comforting to find people that say, I understand. But yet, when we're going through these times of being vulnerable or feeling like our life is falling apart, I think it's the hardest thing is to reach out to people and ask for help. But you mentioned how important a support group was for you, even, for being able to help you in ways that your husband couldn't even help you. And I found that when I had friends back in Washington that we would run together, pray together, you could call and just be real. But how important is it to go into thriving, to have that community?
Oh, it's so important. And I realized as you were mentioning this finding community, which is another practice. I didn't answer the end of your previous question to talk about the 7 practices.
Thank you. Sorry.
So they are choose brave, because choosing brave doesn't need to be big. It just needs to be intentional. And then trusting God. And like I said, I have those 5 steps, because, God has great credentials and we can trust him. And then there is being vulnerable, because, as I like to say, even stiff upper lips need chapstick. And finding community. And then we have embracing the journey and practicing gratitude, reaching out. That's it. That's 7. So those are the 7 practices, and each one has a bit of my story, bit of somebody else's story, bit of a Bible story thrown in there, and then I end each chapter with some questions and a prayer, and we're building towards what I call our Thriver Manifesto. So that's kind of how it is. But you're right. I did find community super important, but not until I'd wrestled with it an awful lot. I kind of shunned the cancer community a little bit. Well, quite a lot, actually, at the beginning, because I kind of went into hunkering down mode. I was like, I have got my family and I've got my close friends, and I don't want to get involved with the cancer community. My cancer navigator, somebody who helps you through your cancer journey, was adamant that I needed to, find a support group and connect with people. And I was like, no. And Sherry, in hindsight, I'll admit that it was partly arrogance. I was like, I don't need them. Nothing that my doctor, my family, my friends, and Google, between us, we can't, sort out. I was also afraid. I was like, well, what if I become close to them and they go and die on me? I'm still grieving my sister Jo and my mom. I'm not sure I can handle anybody else's pain, anybody else's grief, and I felt like I couldn't be the glue in somebody else's life because my life had fallen apart. And so there was fear. And, so there was all sorts of emotions tied up in why I hesitated for so long. But what I realized, Sherry, was that I had this wonderful community that could offer sympathy and practical help and could sit with me in my pain. But I didn't have anyone that could empathize. So there's obviously a difference between sympathize and empathize. And with empathy, it's people who have been there and done it. I needed somebody who could say, I get it. My ostomy bag leaked in Target as well, and this is how you deal with it. Or, just being able to understand how my husband never could, however much he loved me and supported me, and my friends, however wonderful they were, however much they sat with me, prayed with me, brought meals, drove the kids. It was unfair of them to expect them to be that community. So in the book, I talk about kind of dancing my way into community, this kind of stepping in to the community I've got around me, and then stepping out to the community that I needed, who are, other cancer survivors. So that's kind of where I feel we need both when we're going through something.
Absolutely. You say that you call them practices and not tools.
Yeah.
Because people often refer to tools as something that fixes things. But at the end of the book, you do acknowledge that these practices are part of a toolkit.
Yeah.
And so I would love how you could talk about how can you use these 7 practices in preparation for day-to-day, minute by minute, how to have them ready to pull out when we need them in that mind shift.
Yeah. Although I talk about them as practices at the beginning, because it's really acknowledging that as a practice, it's something where we acknowledge where we are now and we want to move forward day by day, and we never get there. To say that I now trust God and that part of me is fixed would be, complete rubbish. But in the sense that I wanted people to envision taking these practices with them wherever they go, whatever their situation, even once life is back to normal, whatever that might look like, because there's never a moment in my life when I'm not thinking, "Ooh, I need one of these practices, these tools." And it's as if I'm wearing it around my waist, and I'm like, "Oh, in this situation, I need to dive into community. This one, I need to embrace the journey a little bit more. And this one, I need to pull out gratitude and trust in God." And so whether it's our, teenagers breaking curfew, or, our toddlers, or struggling with something, we always have these tools, these practices, at our beck and call, right where we need them.
Absolutely. Thank you. So as we're wrapping up, what would you say, one thing to someone who's listening whose world has absolutely fallen apart this year?
Mm. Well, apart from saying, "I'm so sorry, and I just hate that for you," I think one of the things I talk quite a lot about is, what God has to say to us in our pain and suffering. And I think one of the things he said to me so often is, "Stop waiting." And Sherry, it sounds so harsh. I'm like, "What do you mean stop waiting? I'm running on fumes here." But there's an element of, don't wait for life to get better, to find me, to lean into me, to discover all that I have for you, the strength and the peace and the purpose and the joy and the intimacy and connection with me and with others. It's all right here in the middle of the pain. And so I really want to encourage you, don't wait. Yes, give yourself time and grieve, but God is in that. And God will work through it and meet you in it. And I'd hate for you to say, "Hold on a minute, God, I've just got to get through this. And then I'll get back to you, or then I'll let you in, or then I can live this life you have for me." So don't wait.
Mm, that is good. Thank you so much. And I want to encourage the listeners again to buy your own copy of the book, Breathe Again. And then I would love it if you bought the book and then shared some comments with me on the practice that resonated with you. You could also find Niki. There'll be links to be able to find her podcast and her book and connect with her on the podcast notes. So thanks again so much for joining me.
Oh, you're welcome, Sherry. It's been a delight.
I hope the message that Niki shared today encourages you to breathe again, to live well when life falls apart. I loved the message that we can find pain and peace in the same hand. And I was encouraged with her challenge to stop waiting. God doesn't want us to wait for life to get better before we find Him and discover all that He has for us right now. God is in the grief with us. He will work through it, and He will meet you in it. Ways to connect with Niki, buy her book, and also download the freebies on her website are all in the show notes. If you have not subscribed to this podcast, please do so. That way, you will not miss up-and-coming episodes. And when you leave a rating and a review, that helps me serve you better, as well as helps others find the podcast. During today's episode, did a friend come to mind who you know would be blessed by this message? If so, would you share this link with them? Listeners like you sharing links with others is how this podcast can reach more people. I'd also love to have you subscribe to my email list. I will send a weekly update with a little more of a personal touch and information about new episodes before they come out. Thank you so much for tuning into Your Spiritual Game Plan, the podcast that helps you understand God has a plan and you have a purpose in it.